firstly, we'll start with the Queen's tour of Australia in 1954. How rare is it for a monarch to spend 2 months in a country?
Well, it doesn't happen anymore. Things were very different back in those days. In actual fact, that 2 months in Australia was part of a Commonwealth tour that lasted altogether 6 months, during which the Queen and Prince Philip left their 2 children, as they had then, behind in Malta, which was where they were living at the time. This tour back in 1954 was supposed to have taken place 2 years earlier, but it was only just beginning, of course, when the Queen's father, King George, then tragically died while the Queen and Prince Philip were in Kenya, and they had to come home, obviously. So 2 years later, in 1954, they set off on this mammoth journey, which nowadays simply wouldn't happen, and obviously in the later part of the Queen's reign there were no tours of that magnitude, but this was colossal. And Australia, I suppose, in many ways was the highlight of that tour. The reception for the Queen there was extraordinary. The miles she covered, the number of flights she got on, the number of car journeys she did. By present standards, it's really mind-blowing. I mean, now, you know, they hop on a plane, either a private plane or they fly out clearly first class. It's all done very, very quickly. This tour, a lot of it involved the Royal Yacht Britannia, which is not in use anymore. And it was an opportunity for Australia to see the Queen, clearly, obviously, but for the Queen, I think, to get a real sense at that time of the extraordinary reception that she got and was going to continue getting in all the different parts of the world. And really, over all the years, whatever people think about the royal family, whether they're pro or anti, whichever way they may have voted in any referendums, the level of that popularity on the ground really survived throughout her reign. So that tour set the tone for it very much.
And this tour was also post-World War II. What did the Queen represent post-World War II?
Well, I think she would have liked to be seen to represent change and a new era. Bear in mind, she was only 27 when she set off on that tour. You know, Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister. He welcomed her back to Britain at the end of that tour. But I think Britain and the rest of the world, the Commonwealth, was very anxious then to shrug off, if you like, the awfulness, the depression, the grimness of those war years. And this young Queen represented a change. I mean, in Britain, politically, things hadn't changed a lot. You know, we still had very much the same sort of political structure, the same feel about our politicians. But the Queen was very much a breath of fresh air. And I think that tour really set the tone for that. And I think this was her saying to the world, I've arrived, I'm going to be different, I'm more accessible. I mean, her accessibility then, back in the 50s, was nothing as compared to the accessibility that the royal family has striven for since. But nevertheless, it heralded a new era, a new approach by the royals, a new way of being seen, interacting with the public.
Let's talk about Charles's history in Australia. Why did the King, or back then he was of course a prince, choose to study here in Australia at the age of 17?
Well, Charles had been at a school in Scotland called Gordonston, which was known for its, I suppose to put it mildly, fairly harsh routine. And he is said to have referred to that school as Colditz in kilt. comparing it to famous German prisoner of war camp. There's been a lot of debate about that since. Did he really say that? Was it really as bad as he thought it was? But there is no doubt he had a wretched time at that boarding school in Scotland. He was bullied, he wasn't happy, and it was a very, very tough existence, not dissimilar in many ways to the school that he then went to in Australia, Timbertops. But I think the idea was, A, to broaden his horizons, and B, to get him into a place where he actually would enjoy himself more. And I don't think there's any question that that was the case. I mean, he spent 6 months out there in Australia. He called it the happiest part, or the best part, of his entire education. And I think when he looks back on that, as he has done on several occasions, he would see that visit to Australia as being very, very formative for him. He found himself out there. He was away from the sort of stuffiness of Britain, the whole expectation of the royal family, even then the public attention on them. It was much more private. And it was much more relaxed. I mean, there were moments there he has written about in letters where he did find it pretty tough. But overall, it was a good experience for him.
It wasn't an easy trip. He undertook a lot of different expeditions in the blistering heat. He had to climb peaks, spend freezing nights in a sleeping bag, for example. He really got a taste of Australia, didn't he?
Yes, he did, and he complained about, we couldn't cook our tinned food because of the risk of bushfires, and, we had to eat cold food. He said his hands got covered in blisters. He was complaining then, and he's he's not averse to complaining about things now. But I think overall, despite those moments when he was tested physically, I think he felt it was a very, very worthwhile experience. And I think it would be fair to say that was the beginning of his lifelong fondness for Australia, which, of course, lasts to this day.